We were young until we weren't, but the books stay the same. Rereading our favorite books.
To pick up like what you were saying of having sort of the vignettes interspersed throughout this main thread, I feel like we almost kind of got that with An Mei's story. Outside of Jing Mei, it might be the most coherent, complete story is An Mei and her mom, not with her daughter. Who gives a about her daughter? But An Mei coming to this realization about how her mom starts as this, she's called a ghost because she has been excommunicated from her family for remarrying. And apparently back in the day in China, if you were a widow, it was seen as a big old faux pas to remarry, but even more so to remarry as basically a concubine. So we start off like her mom was apparently did a really bad thing. I wonder what happened. And we get like a very skewed perspective on it at first, but we learn more and more and more. And we get this like really interesting imagery at the end of An Mei's first chapter where An Mei's grandmother is dying. So An Mei's mother, I know I'm doing so many moms and grandmas and all that jazz, but
I did that the whole summer. It's good.
An Mei's mom does this thing where she makes her An Mei's grandmother a soup, and she actually cuts off a part of her own flesh and puts it in the soup. And this is supposed to be restorative. It's supposed to ground the grandma in this world and reconnect her, bring her back. And it doesn't work. So then you get this second chapter with An Mei where we see the mom, in some senses, make another sacrifice of her flesh in order to save someone else when she commits suicide. And this time it does work. And I thought that was like a really cool way to set up something and to have a payoff for it in a really dramatic, emotional way that works. Because it does work. An Mei has a much better life because of this sacrifice that her mom has made. But then it's also frustrating because then An Mei's story continues with her daughter's chapters, and that's the one with, I think his name is Bing, the little brother who falls into the water and drowns. And I was thinking like, okay, so we get this setup that...
Right.
What?
I want to add in, because it further to your point that it's An Mei's story is the most tied together, because in that, she like throws the sapphire ring in the ocean to like hopefully, like it's a sacrifice again. And this ring was given to her by her mother. So like it continues this theme of sacrificing of mothers for children, and specifically An Mei's mother.
So it works on that level, but it also just feels like it's not connected because she's not actually... What would have connected it is if An Mei had cut off a piece of her own flesh and threw that into the ocean, or even threw herself into the ocean, because that's what her own mom did. And it could have been like this interesting contrast between her Chinese life and her American life, where this thing worked in China, but it doesn't work in America, and that whole chapter is about faith. And so it would have been like a cool way to show how the mom's faith in her culture has been shaken by this event. But it doesn't do that because these stories aren't actually connected. They're connected in the most surface level ways. And any opportunity to dig deeper just isn't really there because there hasn't been enough work. Like you said, there hasn't been enough work to actually turn this into a novel.
Yep.
It just feels like really lazy writing. And it feels like, again, that's not necessarily on Amy Tan because she's just been asked to turn these stories that she's written with no intention in mind of making them into a novel. She's been asked to make them into a novel. As an editor, you have to jump in and be like, okay, this needs to be spruced up. This needs to be ramped up. We need to cut this. We need to cut that.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me is just really suspicious of how well it did And I think that this is something that was galvanized by reading the Frank Chin's article. Just the feeling that this is a very safe book when it comes to depicting American culture. This seems like the kind of book that would be tailor-made for white liberals to read and be like, ah, yes, I am progressive because I'm not racist. I've read this book. But a reason why it can be accepted in that way is that it doesn't actually push back at all against American culture, except in very weak, flimsy ways that it feels very much like it's reinforcing a certain perspective of Chinese American culture that isn't challenging anyone at all.
Yeah, I could tell you my pretty, instinctive pushback on that first. Because I just feel like it's kind of, ahistorical, if that makes sense. People didn't think people would want to read Chinese American stories back when this got published. This is kind of what caused the push for that story. And that in Kingston as well. But, it's hard for me to make that argument about something that was published so long ago when more diverse voices had a really hard time getting published. And I also, that Frank Chin article, I get what he was saying, and certainly the myth-making, I can understand him being uncomfortable with. He did his work showing the whole Mulan ballad and being like, hey, what are y'all doing with it? But, also he was like, Kingston said, that her book was semi-autographical, and he's like, we've moved entirely into fiction because no women are treated like this. And I was like, bruh, how do you know how women are treated? So, I was like, well, this is a ride. This is truly a ride.
Uh-huh.
I'm always hesitant. There's this point where he's like, I read it and I was like, that's wild that you just went out there and said that. It's the part where he talks about those who were to be published simply blanked out all experiences that did not jive with the stereotype. And I was like, dude, ever thought maybe people have different experiences than you? But I understand your pushing back on Amy Tan. I really truly think the reason this got so popular is she was one of the first to look at relationships between Asian American women and their mothers. I think that really is what pushed this there. And I think the fact that her prose is very readable did the rest of the work. And like you said, the fact that it is easy for white people to consume and also just in some ways relate to. It's there's a lot of things that aren't very relatable, but difficult relationships with your mom are something that is kind of universal. That's my argument for why it did so well. Sometimes books that aren't super well written become really popular.
Indeed. Cough, cough, Harry Potter.
I was thinking more cough, cough, 50 Shades of Grey, but...
That's a good one, too. I don't know. I just think what I was reminded of when I was reading this book, I met Paul Beatty, and I was just having a conversation with him, and only realized in retrospect, how lucky I was just to have, 10 minutes of this guy's time. We ended up, chatting about increasing representation in lit magazines, because I was working on a lit magazine at the time, and he was really pushing back on that push because he felt like what was going to end up happening is that we would just end up publishing a lot of bad stories or poetry or short stories or whatever, all in the name of diversity. I was just so much reminded of that conversation when reading this. And I think it was also spurred by all the quotes praising the book at the beginning, which I went back after I finished the book and went through. But it just all these people saying oh, the characters are so distinct and so full of life and complexity and blah, blah, blah. And it just feels like really condescending attitude that you see every now and then with diverse writers or just people who are not white and male of just we just have to give them brownie points for trying. And it's so frustrating when I was thinking about how do I talk about this book without coming off as a right bastard? I never had the same hesitation when I was talking about C.S. Lewis. So why do I feel differently about this book? If I hate it, it shouldn't matter that she's Chinese American, but I just think there is...
Well, talking about a condescending attitude, it's funny because I read that differently.
Mm-hmm.
not that they're giving like brownie points per se. For me, it feels so much more like women writers sometimes, writers of color sometimes, where it's like, oh wow, this other perspective exists, and they were brave enough to put it on paper. Look at this fascinating specimen of another experience. So cool. Did you know, like, these characters, they're so full of life, and they live such different lives. To me, it feels like less like getting brownie points for it, and more that that's like the only part of the story they focus on. Because they're like, this is so cool and different because it's not a white man. Amazing that those exist.
You're a woman.
Yes, I hope that's not a problem.
Not at all. There's plenty of scale on the wall. This is the 20th century after all, though some don't like to admit it.
Obviously, minority writers have a harder time getting published in general. And for me, the push towards more diversity in publishing is more like, let minority writers have the same opportunity to publish their mediocre work that white people have had for all these years. There's so many mediocre white writers out there.
I know, that's something I thought about too. It's like, obviously minority writers are allowed to be mediocre. I hate it when it feels like, because like they're the only one around, we have to elevate them to the same status of Jane Austen. I don't know. This book is fine. Let's just say it's fine.
I mean, I did want to talk about, like, thinking both about Toni Morrison and thinking about the fact that this is, like, really centered around mothers and daughters, thinking about these mother-daughter relationships, and also thinking about, like, letting characters be ugly in the same way as Toni Morrison. Like, what's the quote? Like, not best foot forward fiction. Like, I think that one of the things that is, I mean, I feel like this happens with a lot of family relationships, right? There can be this kind of like very syrupy presentation of like familial bonds. Like many relationships, mother-daughter relationships can be really ugly and can be like very tense and have these moments of like, again, all familial relationships are distinctive in their own way. And there's a very distinct dynamic to mother-daughter relationships. And I am going to say right here, I'm very lucky. I have an excellent relationship with my mother. She's one of my best friends in this world. I am one of the sappy ones. But that said, there have been moments where we have had very big explosive fights and not great moments. And honestly, at least in my experience, and I can only speak from that, there is no one you can be uglier with than your mother. Because there's no one you trust more to like love you unconditionally in some ways. And that's not necessarily the case for some of the people in the story. Certainly, like, I think there's anxiety about whether their mothers feel that way about them. But I do think there's something about, and this is part of why I wish too the characters were more distinct, because you get these moments of mother-daughter explosion. And there were two cases that really stood out to me, which is obviously Jing Mei and her mother, who have this true to life thing, I feel like, of, you know, the mom having expectations and the daughter rebelling by not rising to meet those in this really interesting way. And then they end up having this whole conversation later on where like her mom is like, the issue isn't that you're not capable of doing these things. Like, her mom still believes that she could do incredible things. She's like, no, you're just lazy. Jing Mei really thinks that her mom has given up on her having any potential. But her mom's like, no, I never gave up on that. It's just like her mom apparently recognizes that she was not going to do anything, you know, that she had made that choice. That's the moment when Jing Mei's mom gives her this necklace, this jade pendant that she's held on to. And Jing Mei never really knows what she meant to like indicate by giving that, but it does seem to be this, it's right after Waverly essentially tells Jing Mei she's at her job. It's this moment of like her mom having her back and like showing support. I don't know. I wanted more of that. I wanted more of that in the other characters. Like, you get that moment too of like, with Waverly and her mom when she decides to like stop playing chess to like punish her mom. Her mom just ignores her. And like, that felt very complicated and not perfect in this way that's like, was really interesting and also felt like very true to life.
Yeah.
I think that those moments were some of the best by far in the book. And I wish that this book centered around mother-daughter relationships was a little more centered around mother-daughter relationships. I'm delving into that because there are moments where you get really interesting dynamics, but unfortunately a lot of the mother-daughter relationships end up kind of boiling down to the mothers and daughters like feeling like they don't understand each other, which is a fine basis. But like for Lena and Ying Ying, like I didn't really understand anything more about the relationship than there was this communication barrier between them. And for Rose and Anmei, the same thing.
There are a couple of moments that stood out to me that I thought were really, really cool in examining that language barrier. The daughters, I don't think any of them really speak Chinese that fluently, or if they do, it's not like the primary form of language. I think there's one scene where they describe how the mom speaks to the daughter in Mandarin and the daughter responds back in English, and that's how they communicate, which obviously things will get lost in translation when you go back and forth like that. But there are a couple of scenes that delve into the language that I think are really interesting and cool. One's with Waverly at the end of her second chapter, which I think might be the worst written chapter in this whole book, except for this moment. That's the chapter Waverly's trying to introduce Rich to the mom and blah, blah, blah.
Rich.
We'll get into that in a second. The mom is trying to tell Waverly this story, some kind of story that relates back to what's going on with Waverly. And Waverly's not really following along. There's a lot of information talking about their family, their ancestors. So they apparently are from this city of, I'm going to mispronounce this, so I apologize, but Taiwan in China, which historically served as the capital city of several Chinese dynasties. So it's a place of power.
Place of power. It's gotta be.
And intelligence and cleverness. And Waverly, in many ways, exhibits a lot of those traits, at least, well, cleverness, I guess, with the chess thing. But the daughter thinks her mom is talking about Taiwan, the country, and makes some joke about how, oh, like everything's made in Taiwan. And instantly the barrier between the mom and daughter goes back up because of that misunderstanding. And they actually have to work through that linguistic barrier so they can understand each other. The shameful part about that chapter is right when they make that breakthrough, the chapter ends. But I do think it's a cool illustration of how these characters are just misunderstanding each other because they really just come from vastly different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Waverly is an American first and Chinese person second. That's a tension that the book is trying to get at, but never really does.
Well, it does a little bit in Linda's last section. It's like before she and Rich and Waverly have traveled to China, and Waverly's like, do you think they'll know? And Linda's like, absolutely. You don't even need to talk. They will know you are not from China. They will know you are American. And then she even talks about going back herself and that she even is no longer understood as, like, that they still treat her like an American. So I think that there's something there.
The other cool part that I wanted to mention is when Jingmei is talking with her dad at the end of the book, and her dad is translating basically all the family's names. So there's the half-sisters who are twins. What do the names mean, I ask. My father draws imaginary characters on the window. One means spring rain, the other spring flower, he explains in English, because they born in the spring, and of course rain come before flower. Same order these girls are born. Your mother like a poet, don't you think? Then yada yada yada. And what does Ma's name mean? I whisper. Again, apologies for mispronunciation. Suyun, he says, writing more invisible characters on the glass. The way she write it in Chinese, it mean long-cherished wish. And then yada yada yada. And what about my name, I ask? What does Jing Mei mean? Your name also special, he says. Jing, like excellent Jing. Not just good, it's something pure, essential, the best quality. Jing is good leftover stuff when you take impurities out of something like gold, or rice, or salt. So what is left just pure essence. And Mei, this is common Mei, as in Mei Mei, younger sister. My mother's long-cherished wish. Me, the younger sister who was supposed to be the essence of the others. I think that moment's really cool in the sense that we see this relationship between the mother and daughter that for Jing Mei, she just had no sense of what it actually was. She had no sense of what her mom was like and what she thought and what she felt. And suddenly you have it all kind of unravel before you with these names being translated. It's almost like you want to know how your mom felt, just look at your own name. And I think that's a really cool emotional moment of connection. I was the long cherished wish for my mom.
It answers her entire kind of character question, which is like she's worried that she's not good enough, that her mom regrets that she didn't have her sisters instead. And instead, yeah, her name means like she is
the essence of these sisters.
Right. Like that for her mom obviously still missed those children. We find out her mom tried to go back and find them. It's a whole thing. But like, as opposed to looking at Junmei and being like, I wish my other daughters were here, she was able to see not only Jingmei, but see her other daughters in Jingmei.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more of like an emotional moment. I did tear up when the sisters see each other, this is like the last couple pages, and they see their mom in each other. See, this is why that part in the Jingmei section is like, there are really great parts of the other stories, like we've discussed, but like that is the strongest part of the book because it is a story that is fully tied together. The ideas of it are coherent.
Yeah.
It comes to a very satisfying resolution. It's very emotional. Like all the emotional beats play off really well.
And there's this other cool part about it because at the beginning of the book, we learned that Jingmei's mom was essentially a refugee, right? The mom's telling the story of basically how they were living during, I guess it's during World War II, and the Japanese were invading China, and how everyone kind of lived under this cloud that's at any moment the Japanese could march into town and take over. And the way the mom describes it is that the city was a city of quote unquote leftovers. And it's very much used in this pejorative sense that, you know, we're just the riffraff of society. But then we see this idea of the leftovers get flipped on its head, where it's the leftovers of something that's been purified. It's just a really cool conclusion of like, yes, this is why the mom did everything she did, so that her daughter could live a life that wasn't like hers. When I got to that moment, it's like, yes, finally some emotional connection with this book that doesn't feel so stilted or awkward or ad hoc. It just felt so satisfying, playing organically from mom suffering through tragedy after tragedy to the daughter meeting her half-sisters and having this beautiful moment of family coming together. And even though they don't know or like understand each other, it doesn't matter in the end because they have each other. They have this connection that surpasses anything else. And it's like, finally, the book is actually doing what it's supposedly supposed to be doing this whole time. Easily the best part of this book. Possibly the only good part of this book. But it certainly is the best.
That's not true. We liked An Mei's backstory bits. And I liked Lindo's first story.
Which one is that again?
The candle.
Oh, the candle one. The mom stories are definitely better.
With the exception of like Ying Ying's first one, which is the randomest story.
I actually kind of like it individually. Like, I like the ideas behind it. I think the image at the end, because the whole premise of it is that she has been taught you should not voice your desires because then they turn selfish. And she's fed this story about the moon lady who you could tell your wish to, and she would grant it, and it wouldn't turn into a selfish desire because the moon lady isn't actually a The point is, it's a loophole that allows you this one time to express your wish. At the end of that story, Ying Ying is watching this play, acting out the story, the myth of the Moon Lady, and she goes to the Moon Lady backstage to tell her wish to her, and she discovers that the Moon Lady is actually being played by a man. And I thought it was like this really potent symbol of just how this myth has basically been used to hold down women within the society. And you see the machination and the apparatus of this myth making, that it's all a lie. This person was actually just a farce, specifically played by a man, telling a myth that specifically told women to stay in your place. That's pretty cool. What does that have to do with the rest of the story? I don't know, but it's cool.
I feel like we should probably use this as a segue to talk some about the men, if you would like. I feel like I've pretty much expressed my opinion that they are mostly bad. I mean, other than like, okay, so I get all of the fathers mixed up, other than Jingmei's dad, who is grieving, and that is sad. And he has that great moment with her at the end that you've already discussed. Other than that, the dads are like, oh, I guess like Lindo's husband, I guess they have that cute moment. But like multiple of them have those moments where they're like, I'm gonna marry this person because they are here. So even though there's the cute moment of like fortune cookie proposal, she's just wants to get married. It doesn't feel like he is anything particularly special. And certainly all of the white men in this book suck, which is accurate. But sorry, Casey. No, but like I think that it's weird how it is both a commentary, like there is some commentary on the difficulty of interracial relationships in terms of understanding the other, communicating. So part of Rose's whole thing with her husband is like when they first start dating, it's very casual. And then she meets his parents and his mom pulls her aside and is like, he seems super nice, but my son is on the up and up. And, you know, there are people who are racist out there and it might be hard for him if he's with you. And then basically because she said that, they get super attached to each other because they feel very like Romeo and Juliet, and then end up getting married, obviously. But then their relationship changes, and like certainly the whole scene with Rich and Waverly, he has no comprehension of her culture and how to interact acceptably within that. And you don't really see the other men trying. Or there'll be offhand mentions from the daughters of one of them doing something that's like really offensive and just not noticing. But like it's not really delved into. It's not like it's really worked through. So it's definitely mentioned, it's there, but that's not really a theme. Yet there's also all of these interracial relationships where that is a thing. It's just weird how like it's there, but it's not like explored, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you completely, because I think there could have been something very interesting here focusing on marriage and the differences in perspectives about marriage. Because with the mom characters, it's just a status thing. It's a practical thing. And I think you mentioned with, was it Lindo? Yeah, Lindo and her husband, where they got married and you were like, but why? And I didn't really have a problem with that as much. To me, it read like, well, they got married because it was just convenient. And I do think there is a generational thing with marriage that we're seeing play out very much right now, where in previous generations, marriage is just like, that's what you did. You married the person that was there, and that was that. And the question of, well, did you love this person?
Do you love me?
You're a fool.
That had less stock than just like, is this marriage practical? And with the daughters, you're seeing a lot of cases where they're marrying for different reasons. they're marrying because they fall for the guys. They get wrapped up in how they make them feel. So like you see with Waverly, she is marrying Rich apparently because Rich treats her like a goddess or some and it's just like that would have been cool to see the differences in how the daughters and the moms butt heads over that issue, but we never actually see it. And I feel like an interesting way to have shown it is have one of the daughters marry someone who isn't successful, because unfortunately all the marriages that take place here are with successful men. And I feel like it would have been interesting to see if one of the daughters married, gasp, an English major, and just how that would have played out. But, oh God, the men in this story, they're not characters. They're the bare minimum of traits stuck together, and we're supposed to assume that this is a human being, but they're not human beings. Okay, rant incoming.
Wait. Can I preface this rant really quick? I want to say, in some of their cases, they don't need to be characters. For instance, like Rose's husband is mostly gone. It starts with like they're getting a divorce and her just working through her feelings. He doesn't really need to be a human being. The same is not true for the other two. Please continue.
Yeah, so Waverly's chapter, which is the worst chapter of this entire book. And that's really saying something, because I think most of these chapters are bad. I've not read any of Tan's other works, so I don't know if she improved in this part. But this woman cannot write romance for the life of her. Oh, God. The first line that filled me with dread was Waverly is describing her ex. And it's fine enough. It's like, oh, he plays tennis and he's like very good looking. And then there's this line where it says, quote, he prided himself on having favorite love positions for different days and hours of the week. All he had to whisper was Wednesday afternoon, and I'd shiver. End quote. Morgan, I read that line. I'm thinking in my head, if the favorite sex positions are tied to certain times and days of the week, does that mean they can only do that sex position on that day? So when he whispers Wednesday afternoon, does that mean it's Wednesday afternoon in the narrative? Or is he like whispering this on Saturday? And like, are they going to do the Wednesday afternoon on Saturday? Or are they going to wait till Wednesday afternoon to do the Wednesday afternoon? It doesn't make any sense. It's a stupid line. And there's so many lines like that. But it just gets worse with Rich, because it's like, it describes how the sexual chemistry was what really surprised me, though. And it's like, oh, that's rough, man. That is really rough line. It feels so clinical, so impersonal. Anyway, enough of that.
Wait, I have comments.
Please, go ahead.
So, I don't know if it's just we're reading different people. But I don't have issues with either of those lines. The sexual positions thing, I was like, for me, because it read like favorite for days of week or times, well, I was like, oh, that doesn't mean they're having it all the time. It's just that like the same as like for me, I like eating certain types of food certain times of day, or whether like, you know, it doesn't mean I have to only eat it at that time. It's just that I associate those things together so it is better at that time. Like, in your head, you begin associating things and you're like, yes, these things are better together for no actual reason. I don't think it'd be like, oh, you start off and you're like, oh, of course, only these things on these days. It's just that like you begin to associate things, and then because you associate them, you automatically think they're better. Does that not happen to you?
No.
That's weird.
I don't.
Well, it's like, okay, so for instance, ever since I was a kid, like I wasn't allowed to have soda most of the time.
This is the weirdest conversation we've ever had, I think.
That's not true. We've had way weirder. There was the Venom sex thing. That was weirder.
Hold on, pause this What the is going on in here on this day?
Anyhow. But like when I was a kid, like I was only allowed to have soda when I was out to eat at like certain restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
So like one of the weird things in my life is that I associate Sprite with Thai food.
Mm-hmm.
Does Thai food actually taste better with Sprite? No, I don't think it does. But to me, it does. If I have Thai food, then I want to be drinking Sprite because it makes it taste better to me because it's associated in my mind. And there are other things like that where I like to do certain things together or certain things at a certain time. It has happened often enough that it's associated in my head and it like feels correct. But the way that it was phrased and worded was very awkward. So I will agree with you that it was worded weirdly. Like if she had like actually gone in and been like, you know, explained the whole association thing or however he thinks of it, like, and he had this whole theory. Certain types of sex were better at certain times. And it was just kind of like one of those quirks people have, like, yeah, seems reasonable, but like, no, as like a one line off, it doesn't work.
And I will see your point that there can be something sexy in the anticipation of a favorite position or whatever. But the way, at least in this book, she is incapable of writing sexiness into her work. It gives me like major 40-year-old virgin vibes of just like when he's describing what boobs feel like and he's like, it's like bags of sand. And it's like, oh, you've never touched boobs before, have you? That's the vibe I'm getting from these kind of lines.
I don't know. I feel like some of them, I think that it's unfair to just ascribe bad sex writing to virginity because, wow, there's so much bad sex writing in this world. And I know some of those people have had sex. So like, I just think it's an unfair link. I think that sometimes people are just bad at writing about sexy things because it's taboo in their mind and they're bad at it. Anyhow, let's continue on with our men discussion that is not related to sex.
Yes, I'm sorry, virgins. I take it all back. You're great people.
I think we drink virgin blood because it sounds cool.
The scene that really stuck out to me with Rich, where he really stopped being a human altogether, was the dinner scene when Rich meets Waverly's parents. And it's supposed to be this disastrous dinner scene. And fittingly enough, the writing is also disaster in this scene. Because we're just told like a series of details that make no sense. One of the faux pas that Rich commits is that he brings this fancy wine that her parents would never appreciate. So why would you because they live together
yes.
at this point. So like in what world would Waverly let Rich bring the wine if she knew this was going to be the reaction?
Yes.
Later on, he takes too much food. He takes 2 big portions of food, which apparently is a big no-no. So why didn't Waverly inform him about this Chinese etiquette? And you could have had a thing where it's like, it's so second nature to Waverly that she just didn't even think about it.
But then why didn't he ask?
Yeah, or like, why didn't she have a moment like, oh no, I should have told him about this. I f***ed up. She doesn't have that moment. It's like, oh God, he's being an idiot. No, he's not being an idiot. You're the idiot in this scene, but the worst scene. And you know what? It's very possible that I'm misreading the scene, but I think there's enough ambiguity to allow this read. It's the scene where the mom is doing the sort of self-deprecating thing of like, oh, my food's not seasoned well enough. It doesn't taste good. And Rich responds by like, oh, just put some soy sauce on it. But this is the way it's described. So the mom says, it is too bad to eat. This was our family's cue to eat some and proclaim it the best she had ever made. But before we could do so, Rich said, you know, all it needs is a little soy sauce. And he proceeded to pour a riverful of the salty black stuff on the platter right before my mother's horrified eyes.
Oh.
And this is the thing. This is a scene I remembered from reading it the first time, but in my mind, I remembered him pouring it onto his own plate. But if I'm to understand this correctly, he pours it onto the communal platter for the whole table. No human operates that way. Like, what is this? That's it's so bad. The writing in that scene is so amateurish of like, you have to create this scene that you want to be comical, so you bend your characters into shapes that they possibly can't. Just
right. So like the issue here is that Rich and Waverly are going to get married, and we're supposed to be happy they are getting married, right?
yes.
As opposed to the other relationships that are failing. This is the relationship that's being created. So the problem here is that we need to have this scene, right? But like you said, it's supposed to be comical, but we're also not supposed to hate Rich after it. So it doesn't work because, like, in a good relationship, either Waverly would tell him in advance, like, hey, like, since you're meeting my parents, here's just some things you should know. You wouldn't know these things because you're white. Or he, and this is what really should have happened, he should have been like, hey, if I was meeting any of my, like, if I was meeting a significant other's parent, doesn't matter what race they are, what gender they are, it doesn't matter who they are. I would be like, hey, since I'm coming and meeting your family, what do I need to know? Because every household has its own kind of etiquette, you know? And like, definitely, if you're going into a household that you know is a different culture than yours, you should be like, hey, what should I know? What do I need to do? Tell me.
Tell me! What?
Tell me!
What do you want to hear?
Just tell me!
So, neither of these things happen, which automatically make it bad. So then you have Rich come in and like Waverly's humiliated, but like he also, like how this could have worked and actually made sense of him like doing these things and her being humiliated is if she told him and he didn't listen.
Right.
But then we hate him because she told him and he didn't listen, you know?
But if you wanted us to like him, because I feel like there's the possibility for a very human moment in that last moment, which is completely unrealistic because, again, no actual living human being would ever fucking pour sauce onto the communal dish that everyone's gonna eat off. The way you do that is that you have Rich pour it and then realize himself, show some self-awareness, be like,
what have I done?
I've met the parents of significant others. It is always an awkward experience. There's a huge pressure on you to impress, to show that you're a good boyfriend or whatever. And there's potential that you will, in an effort to like show how impressive you are, you will do something really, really stupid. And you will realize too late that it was something very, very stupid. So it could have actually been super funny, actually funny, instead of this stupid shit that we get where Rich pours the fucking soy sauce onto the plate and it's like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? And then you have a moment after dinner where Rich is like, why did I do that? Your parents are gonna hate me forever. And you could have had a real bonding moment of Waverly being like, oh, maybe my mom's right. Maybe like Rich isn't the guy for me, blah, blah, blah. And then you had the conversation between Waverly and her mom where the mom is like, no, he seems like a good guy. Yeah, he's stupid, but all American men are stupid. What are you going to do? But I can see how happy he makes you. And that could have been a very sweet moment of these two characters coming together. But no, I'm so frustrated, Morgan.
Yeah, the scene doesn't work at a character level. Like
it doesn't work at any level.
It only works to try and make what, like, it's like, basically, what it feels like to me is that Amy Tan made an outline of what she would like this chapter or short story to be. And then she just kind of, like, made her characters go through it.
Yeah.
You ever get that feeling where, like, a writer's so devoted to whatever they planned that they don't realize that, like, it doesn't actually work for the characters?
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. She just, like, made her little puppets go through the motions. It's hard too with the other one. Well, there are other ones. Like, there's Clifford. Clifford has no personality other than that he spent 4 years wooing someone by going into their shop and, like, there's nothing to say about him. But, yeah. Well, I guess going forward, like, Lena talks about how as a kid, like, her dad needed her to interpret her mom for him, which, like, okay, wild. But thinking about Harold, Lena's husband, who I was originally referring to as the other one, again, something kind of interesting could have been done there because they have this whole like household expense or all expense splitting, which like you kind of made noises when I was complaining about in the summary. And I want to clarify again, I have no problem with the concept. My aunt and uncle actually do something very similar, and it is divided by like their salaries. But the thing that they do and that Lena and Harold don't do, and also it's different because once again, Lena is working for him. He's refusing to promote her or pay her more, and he's stealing her ideas. That is its whole own thing. And then beyond that, like what my aunt and uncle do is they have essentially a communal bank account that they each put a certain percentage of their salary in that's for like things like the mortgage, the electric, the hot, all of those things and other like their pets. And then they keep a certain percentage for themselves for their own things. So like, as my aunt put it, if she wants to like buy a whole bunch of nail polish, my uncle can't be like, why did you buy 20 things of nail polish? And it does solve those little disputes that can come up, right? I think there's a way in which there is something good about that, but it gets taken too far, partially because, like, one of the things that Ying brings up when she's staying with them, Harold is putting down ice cream as one of the things that they divide cost on. But Lena never eats ice cream. She hates ice cream. She has never once touched this ice cream.
Yes.
He has not noticed in all of these years. He just thinks she's always on a diet. And yet he's still making her pay for it, even though he acknowledges he has never seen her eat ice cream. That, plus obviously the workplace situation, causes a really toxic relationship. But, like, we have no idea who Harold is and why Lena is putting up with this, why Harold hasn't noticed these things, why... And, like, none of the part about him stealing her ideas or him being her boss... Like, this is there. You can absolutely understand, like, Amy Tan seems to know that this is part of the unhealthiness of their relationship, and she puts it out there. But, like, none of this is explored. Harold as a person is not explored. He is just kind of a person doing these things,
The reason I was making noises is because I think this is just not my style of dating, is to keep track of expenses. Like, obviously, I think there are certain things where it makes sense if, like, you're living together and you pay rent together, but the whole keeping track, it's just so outside of my realm of how I approach any kind of relationship, not just romantic, but just friendships, anything like that. That's why I was making harumphs and all that jazz. Which I know, obviously, I know that you are kind of the opposite of me in that way, where you very much are somebody who keeps track, and that's something that's very important for you. And,
Oh, yeah, I think, again, like, different dynamics.
Yeah. We're different people, believe it or not.
Whoa.
But I do.
Shocker.
There is something interesting here. It starts as her doing it, and then it morphs into a thing where he uses it for control, but we don't actually see it used in that way in real, meaningful, subtle ways. It's always so on the frickin' nose. You look at this and you're right. Why is she putting up with this? This is such an obvious bad thing. And then she has this like line. She's talking about the cat. So the cat has fleas, and apparently it's her cat, but the cat was a gift to her from her husband. And so there's a whole fight about who should pay for the flea medication. I actually liked that moment because it feels emblematic of how relationships, how the smaller things can be microcosms of much bigger issues. That's always an interesting way to express those things. But then she has this stupid line in there. Lena says, "None of our friends could ever believe we fight over something as stupid as fleas, but they would also never believe that our problems are much, much deeper than that. So deep, I don't even know where the bottom is." And she's acting like, "Oh, you're the only person who's ever gone through a breakup or divorce? Oh, wow."
Big wow!
That feels emblematic of all the daughter sections of how on the nose everything feels. it's like Tan doesn't trust us to get it, that when she's saying that these two are arguing about the flea medication, what she actually means is that they're arguing about their relationship. So it never gets the chance to actually develop anything deeper than that, because it's so concerned about whether we get it or not. It's like somebody telling a story and stopping every 5 seconds to be like, you're following, right? You understand what's happening here, right? And it's like, shut the fuck up and just tell the story. And then there's certain other elements that clearly Tan just missed, because we learned with Lena that she purposely avoided eating food to spite her mom's Chinese superstitions. And it's like, whoa, that would have been a cool moment to see how this thing contributed to some deeper psychological disorder, eating disorder, and how that plays out and how that continues to play out. But it feels like the narrative just forgets about it. And it would have been so much cooler if it brought that back in when the ice cream is brought up. And it's like, dude, she's anorexic. Like, of course she's not eating the ice cream, you know?
The whole thing with ice cream is tied back to the fact that, so her mom tells her that, like, however many, I think you mentioned this earlier, how many other grains of rice are left will cause, like, a pockmark on the face of her future husband. And for some reason, she connects it to this kid that lives on her street. And she's like, oh God, like, is he my future husband? I forget how she connects it that way. I don't remember. I'm sorry. But
the neighborhood boy has a bunch of pockmarks himself, and he's like really ugly looking.
Okay. So she's like, I caused those. And so she's like, oh, maybe if I continue to not eat, he will get more and more, and then I will not have to marry him. She does this, right? So then she goes through her anorexic phase, like she's already kind of in this, and then she finds out 3 years later that he has died. And she's like, oh my God, I caused this. And then she goes home, eats an entire tub of ice cream, and then pukes it all back up. So she says specifically that she doesn't eat ice cream because it now, like, reminds her of that moment. And, like, the whole eating the whole tub of ice cream thing is, like, her end to anorexia. But, like, of course, if you eat an entire tub of ice cream and you've been anorexic previously, you will puke it back up. So,
but describing that as the end of her anorexia feels like so just because eating disorders don't just disappear.
Absolutely. Just like, and that's when she decides to not do that anymore. You know what I mean? But yes, absolutely. There should be more, especially because he's like, her husband's like, I thought you were always on a diet. That would have been an interesting place to be like, have her be like, well, you know, the ice cream is obviously connected to, like, she just always remembers picking it back up. So it makes sense she doesn't want to eat ice cream anymore. Mm-hmm. But, like, maybe he could have talked more about how she is always on a diet. Maybe, like, you know, a lot of people who were anorexic end up going on later in life to go through, like, periods of manic dieting. Because, like, it's that same impulse. Absolutely. I think that it should have continued to be something present in her life, and it is not. I was just objecting to the use of that ice cream as a specific example.
Yeah, but there's also the way she describes puking up the ice cream. Let me see if I can find it.
Okay, here we go. I found it. That night in my room, I gorged myself. I had stolen a half-gallon of strawberry ice cream from the freezer, and I forced spoonful after spoonful down my throat. And later, for several hours after that, I sat hunched on the fire escape landing outside my bedroom, retching back into the ice cream container. And I remember wondering why it was that eating something good could make me feel so terrible, while vomiting something terrible could make me feel so good.
Yes.
And yes, that is absolutely eating disorder mentality.
For me, the book is full of so many details like that never get developed more. And it's just clear to me that Tan didn't realize.
And I did want to make a distinction at this point because, like, there is a way in which not fully delving into something and just mentioning it can give the idea that a character is more real, right? A fully fleshed character, you should have a sense that they have lives going on beyond what the story is exploring. That said, it would be fine if Amy Tan didn't want to devote her entire Lena section to talking about her eating disorder. Mm-hmm. But, like, if you give her an eating disorder, you then do need to continue having that be an element of her life. And that's the problem, is that a lot of these things are just kind of put out there and either not continued or not explored, or like it just feels they are there only in certain moments. And I think that's the problem, is that it makes it feel less real, because if, you know, as you mentioned, Lena had struggled with an eating disorder, that kind of mentality will continue to come back at certain points throughout your life or impact you throughout your life. But in here, it feels like it's only there in this one moment, and then it just poof, vanishes. The same as like Lindo's son, who dies in the car accident, who only gets mentioned like the once. Again, it's fine if it was a while ago that he passed away. Her every thought doesn't need to be consumed with her son who died in a car accident. But there would probably be slightly more references to her son that died in a car accident. And just things like that. And I think that, yeah, building more connection between the stories, between the characters, between everything, making it feel more fully fleshed out and picking up these unresolved thoughts. This really does feel like a first or second draft, as opposed to something that's completed. And again, I blame Amy Tan's editor.
Yes, the lesson we can learn from this is that don't think you can just take all of your short stories and smash them together and that will magically turn them into a novel.
No, that's a short story collection.
Yes. I mean, I get why it was presented as a novel, because novels sell better than short story collections. But man, I feel like my attitude would have been so much different if this was a short story collection.
Agreed.
That ends our women writers debut novels trilogy.
Wait, I actually want to end with a personal anecdote about the time that I think I met Amy Tan.
Oh, think you met Amy Tan?
Well, I wasn't brave enough to go up and actually talk to her.
Let's hear it.
But I'm pretty good at recognizing faces, and Amy Tan does have a pretty distinctive face, at least in my mind. Like, she's just very recognizable looking. Not like in a bad way. I don't mean this in like a bad way. So, I was with my friend. We were in San Francisco. We were going to a Cirque du Soleil show. And we were going on press night because I got press tickets.
Nice.
Yeah. And so there were other like press people or like important guests or things there. Anyhow, so we were just chilling in like the main tent where they were selling food and stuff prior to the show. And I look over and there's this woman that I swear to God, it's Amy Tan. It looked just like her. Like, I've seen her picture enough. I know what Amy Tan looks like. And like, I was just standing there and I was like, it makes sense. She's like a Bay Area person. Of course. Like, and it's press night. It makes sense Amy Tan would be here. And I was so convinced, but I was like, I didn't have like anything she could autograph. Like, I didn't have any paper with me. I was going to Cirque du Soleil. Like, I wasn't planning for this. And then the humiliation, what if I went up to her and she wasn't Amy Tan? Like, how embarrassing would that be, right? So I was like, maybe I'll try and Google her picture just so I can like confirm, right? And I had my friend there with me, so I was like, I can get my friend to look for me and try and confirm. I'm trying not to be creepy while I'm doing this, you know? Like, I was really trying hard not to stare at her. But yeah, so I tried. There was like no internet reception. I could not pull up a picture of Amy Tan. So I just kind of like lightly circled her some more. And then, you know, I swear to you, this was Amy Tan. I swear to f***ing God. But I could not muster up the courage to go and talk to her. And I was like, it's been so many years since I read her books. I couldn't even in that moment tell you a character's name. I could name probably the novel of hers I remember liking the most, but I don't remember what happened in it. So I was like, if I go up and I'm like, are you Amy Tan? And she's like, yes. What do I say then? Like, I like your books. It's been so long. I can't have a meaningful conversation. I don't want to annoy her on her nice night out. So that's the story of how I almost met Amy Tan.
Oh my God.
Anyhow, Amy Tan, I hope you're having a nice life out there. I remember really liking one of your other novels, and I'm sure that the issues that were in your debut, that were mostly caused by your editor, you fixed later on.
And you know what? Even if you didn't, that's fine. There are plenty of people who have gotten a lot of value from these books. I'm not one of them, and that's okay. That doesn't, as much as I would like to think otherwise, I'm not the dictator of what is good and what is bad.
And I had a nice time rereading it. Not my favorite thing in the world, but it was not unpleasant. I enjoyed it. Good times.
It's interesting because the next book we're reading is one of your favorites.
And if you give that one tepid praise, I will die. Slowly, surely, crumble to the ground.
I do sense another threat of murder coming my way, so...
The continued threat of me crying on this podcast. If you don't like that book, I might cry. And I mean that for real this time.
I don't want to make you cry.
I probably won't cry. But we'll see. The continued saga. Will Morgan cry?
Will Morgan murder Casey? Who knows? Find out next time on Reread.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe, give us 5 stars. Comment, review.
Love us. Love us.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hasta la vista.